This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
It's really our duty, all of us, to kind of reclaim being a patriot, right? And at the left too. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be seen as an exclusively Republican thing or a MAGA thing or something like that. I think that's not good for us as a country. We have to have some shared identity and some shared values that's going to bring us all together, right? That transcends these political differences and these policy differences and so on. We have to have something that keeps us together, or I don't see how we can stay together as a nation ultimately.
The Village Square, a nervy bunch of liberals and conservatives who believe that disagreement and dialogue make for a good conversation, a good country, and a good time. At the Village Square, we talk about politics, religion, and race. You know, the topics your mom taught you never to discuss in polite company. Listen, at the Village Square, we make pigs fly.
Hey folks, welcome to Village Squarecast. This is Corey Nathan. So glad to be with you again. Thank you for joining us for Old Lady Liberty is 250 and she's having an identity crisis. I love these titles. Village Squarecast is funded in part by Florida Humanities with support from the Federation of State Humanities Councils and the Mellon Foundation. Lately, it's pretty hard to zero in on what we have in common as a people. It often feels like we're living in alternate realities with completely different sets of values and priorities. What would it take for us to more widely agree on a national narrative? And what are the dangers of failing to do so? God Squad will make a valiant attempt to wrestle some transcendent principles out of the partisan mud pit, principles that stand a chance of leading us into a better time. This episode was recorded live in Tallahassee at First Baptist Church. Moderating the discussion was Liz Joyner, founder and president of the Village Square, joined by God Squad regulars Father Tim Holeda of Co-Cathedral at St. Thomas More, and Rabbi Paul Sidlofsky of Temple Israel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christine Cox, who then hands it off to Liz, and then I'll see you after the program for some closing thoughts.
Well, welcome to God Squad. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Christine Cox. I'm the director of your local Village Square. If we have not met before, I love seeing all the familiar faces and I love seeing new faces coming out for God Squad. This is our final God Squad of the season. Our season is like a school year. But stay tuned because, we talk about sprinkling in perhaps maybe one in the summer. I don't know. We'll see. So stay tuned on email, social media. Keep up with us there. Our next event that's coming up is that bright orange and green poster that's on your table, Created Equal. It's coming up on April 21st. It's an evening event at the Moon. This year, the theme is food, the soul of food. So, who doesn't love that, right? But it'll be a fantastic panel discussion followed by table conversations and some sampling from some local caterers that are in the realm of the soul food area. So it should be quite a spectacular evening. If you're interested, you can check it out and register. I think that is all. Also, thank you to those who are members in the room, Village Square membership, your donations, or if you donated online when you registered, those are super important to our little nonprofit here, doing our best to stretch every single penny and dollar that we get to do the work that we do. And we appreciate you very much. There are membership cards sprinkled around the table if you're interested. Okay, so now without further ado, I will say thank you to First Baptist Church for hosting us, and thank you to Pastor Josh, who could not be with us here today, yet he still offered to host. He is off celebrating with his family. I think there's a new baby in the family, an anniversary. There's a lot going on, so that's wonderful for him. And Pastor Joe could not be with us due to a death in the family. So that was a last minute thing. But we have our rock stars here with us today. And our very own founder, Liz Joyner, is going to moderate the discussion. So you're in for a real treat no matter what. And I will hand it off to Liz. So thanks for coming.
So in 16 years of doing God Squad, I have never facilitated. I've been on the panel a couple times, so we'll see. What do you think? It'll be an adventure. I'm Liz Joyner, founder and president of the Village Square.
Father Tim Holeda, I'm at the Co-Cathedral, St. Thomas More.
Paul Sidlofsky, Rabbi at Temple Israel.
So we've actually, at the Village Square in our Unum series, really for 5 years, but especially this year in the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, we have been talking, we've been having this conversation in various ways. So I'm really excited to talk with Tim and Paul today. So I'm going to start with a quote from a piece called For Americas by George Packer in The Atlantic a few years ago. It began, nations like individuals tell stories in order to understand what they are, where they come from, and what they want to be. His assertion is that there's never just one story, that there are lots of stories. What's your story? What's your story of America?
That's a big question. What's my story?
Yeah. Well, you can tell your story is interesting too, but what do you think of as being the story of America? Doesn't have to be long.
Well, I think it's a story of people who came here for a lot of different reasons. We had people escaping persecution for their faith. We had people who were seeking to make a new life, seeking to make some money. There are all kinds of different types of people. We have people who were brought here against their will. A whole conglomeration of folks from different backgrounds, and maybe a majority of them were European descent, but different countries even there, that tried to start something new, eventually united. Of course, very controversial. I don't know if anyone watched the PBS, the recent Ken Burns' American Revolution. It was pretty fascinating to hear just how divided the country was even during the revolution. But eventually, obviously, winning independence, but having a vision. I mean, our founding fathers had a vision for equal rights, for freedom, borrowing from the Lockean kind of view of government, that government derives its power from the consent of the governed. And so they're trying to do this new thing that really kind of was different in the rest of the world and never really seen before. And I think that's the first thing I would say. And of course, not a perfect history. There's been a lot of mistakes. We've continued to grow. And I look at our nation just like we as a church have grown and changed over the 2,000 years we've been in existence. As the church continues to grow in its knowledge of who it is and who Jesus was and what the church means and so on, it continues to grow and move forward while still holding on to its past. I see our country in the same way, that as a birth of a nation in the late 1700s, late 18th century to now, we're still continuing to grow. It's still a process as we begin to continue to understand who we are. But we need to also have a history that we hold on to as well. We can't just start from scratch.
So I'll speak from a couple of perspectives. One, I'll start with the general Jewish perspective of what this country means. Then I'll just talk personally for a moment. I think a lot of the Jewish experience in this country resonates with what Father Tim has just said, that Jews came originally from Eastern Europe to escape persecution and economic hardship, and to try and find a new life. They had heard about this wonderful golden land where everything was great. Some of them thought the streets were paved with gold and everything would be just wonderful. If you saw Fiddler on the Roof, it's kind of a bit of a romanticized version of that. There are elements of truth, but that sort of captures the essence of the story. And so the first wave of immigration, Jewish immigration to this country, was starting around 1880 and lasted through about beginning of World War I. Large amounts of immigration. People came largely through Ellis Island in New York, and spread out various places. and were involved in opportunities where they could find jobs. They didn't know English. They had very little money, if any, in their pockets. But they were, like my two grandfathers, one was a furrier, one was a tailor. They came over and found jobs. And then, as was often the case, their children, the next generation, became the first college-educated people generation in their families, and often sought professions such as medicine or law or other things. So it was a great land of opportunity for Jews as well as many other people. On a I will just say that following the 1880 through World War One, or overlapping, later was a wave from Western Europe. More of the enlightened Jews would call them, the more modern Jews, the one who were very assimilated in their countries, including, ironically, Germany. Many Jews fought in World War I proudly as Germans, and then, of course, with the rise of Hitler and the Nazis, found that they were no longer welcome there. And so a lot of these Jews from there and other parts of the world were seeking refuge as well in a different way. And these two groups clashed a lot because they were very different from each other. One saw the other as not Jewish enough, and the other saw the assimilated ones saw the other ones as an embarrassment and not what they wanted to portray themselves as Jews. So that was kind of how Jews got involved. Personally, I mentioned I would speak is that I'm not originally from this country. I'm from Canada. I now have citizenship here for 14 years. And so I know personally the immigration experience here. I'm married to an American. It was a little easier, obviously easier because I speak English, because I was from Canada, not from certain other countries. It was very easy, certainly back then, to get citizenship. Not easy, but easier. So I don't take it for granted. I think it's very important, and I had to do all the studying and take the tests and everything like that. And I think there would be a lot of questions on that test that a lot of Americans wouldn't know. And I wouldn't either if I didn't have to study for it. But it's kind of nice to be able to do that. I equate it to people who are interested in converting to Judaism. I deal with every year. And they need to learn and become acquainted, and often they become more well-versed than a lot of people who grew up in the religion. So I think being American is not something we should take for granted.
Speaking of that, I think the citizenship ceremonies are just the most amazing thing to watch. I feel like maybe as citizens, we ought to have to go to one every 5 years or something like that to see people making that commitment.
Yeah. And I think this is a country of immigrants, and I think we forget that sometimes, and we need to appreciate that. While we have to be careful, there have always been laws about who can come and who can't, and it was very clear stipulations when I came. I know it was a long process, and I had to go to one interview after another and all sorts of forms and background checks, and that's how it should be done. It should be a legal process. But to not allow people to come in because of a particular nationality or something like that is problematic. So I think we need to be open. I think we're a stronger country when we have people coming in, and we forget that virtually all of us, unless we're Native American, we're not from here.
Were once. So, I think there's so many things we take for granted. Part of my story that I would tell of America is just how extraordinary the Declaration was. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. And at a time when it was not at all self-evident. At a time when the most likely outcome for them, for these ideas that they were asserting, was that they would be hung eventually as traitors to the king. You mentioned the American Revolution, Ken Burns' documentary. Our last guest was Jane Kaminsky from Monticello, and she was one of the historians that they interviewed in that. And she had a couple of quotes, a sentence and a word that I thought were just kind of incredible. One was, "To believe in America is to believe in possibilities." And the word she used, she said this idea that was clearly originally meant for landed white men, was leaky, that people saw it from not just in America, but from all over the world and said, maybe I want that too. Any thoughts about, the Declaration, that sentence, or those ideas?
I mean, I think the premise is, I think we still see this in some parts of the world, and that's due to perhaps culture, sometimes religion, but the idea that some people are less than others. And the idea of America, I think, is that doesn't exist, and that everyone has a chance, and everyone should have the same chance, so to speak, at least legally. It's impossible to level the playing field. Obviously, there's some people like I'm at a disadvantage when it comes to basketball, for example. I'm not very tall, right, or being a quarterback or something. So there's things we can't control, but that we should at least, in terms of the way we set up society, everyone should have a chance, and everyone has worth, and everyone has value, and that's, I think, the core of the Declaration. It's self-evident that we're endowed with rights, and we have rights, and we have dignity, and that the government's job is to protect those things and to protect us from any threats to that, and ensure that we have the ability to live pursue happiness, right? And that we have life, that we have liberty, and so on. So Locke originally had property instead of, I believe, the pursuit of happiness. And I like property's great and all, but I think the pursuit of happiness works a little better for me. I don't know what y'all think. I think it's Thomas Jefferson was good to change that.
I just read John Meacham's bio of Jefferson, and it talked about how upset he was. He was basically edited in a whole room full of people. So he had his words, and then he had to listen to, 30 people say, yeah, no, strike that, which also just seems so human, right? I think our story is way more human than sometimes we imagine it.
I certainly agree with everything that was said. I think this is supposed to be, in its best sense, a land of opportunity. It's a place where, yes, not everyone it can achieve exactly the same. Unfortunately, one of the bigger problems is that a lot of people are born into a situation where they do have a certain amount of privilege and other people are not. And it's a much harder struggle if you come from a family who is educated and who has socioeconomic status and so on, to be able to achieve, professional status, go get educated, all those things. If you don't, it's not impossible, but it's much more of a struggle. So we have to continue. There's a real debate now in the country of, I guess always has been, about saying, well, we should just let everyone, loose and let them be free to do what they can, and those survival of the fittest, basically. Whoever survives, and that's capitalism. That's everything. It's another to say we also have a responsibility toward those who have the least and who need the most help. As we know, as Americans starting out, certainly in Jewish teaching, that we are taught that we had a background of being strangers and even enslaved thousands of years ago, and we need to remember those who need that. So I think this is a place, not so much that, the goal is not for everyone to become a star athlete or, this or that, but everyone has the opportunity to shine or to succeed in their best way. So if someone is cut out for a certain type of life, they should have the opportunity to do that, not be prevented from doing that. If they may not originally feel they have that, but could develop into that, they should have the opportunity to develop. And so it's that chance for everyone to have that opportunity. And I think, the Constitution and everything else kind of enshrines that we have these rights. And again, it's not as much a privilege as a right for everybody to be able to live freely.
So I'm going to jump back to Packer one more time. And so in his article, The Four Americas, was a book too that I don't remember the title of, he described free America, smart America, real America, and just America. And one of his quotes was smart Americans. So that's sort of the liberal elite, I would say, is sort of the description that he smart Americans are uneasy with patriotism. The winners in smart America, connected by airplane, internet, and investments to the rest of the globe, have lost the capacity and the need for a national identity, which is why they can't grasp its importance to others. Thoughts? Is that a thing?
I think that, I've been thinking a lot about this whole national identity idea. To me, the national identity shouldn't be one uniform belief or identity, as identity as an American, but that we should all, the identity should be that all of us are free to practice our religion, our political beliefs, or whatever it may be, freely and express them freely without punishment, without persecution. Does that mean that people can just do whatever they want? No, it means there have to me the democracy ends where people are using their democratic rights to harm others. So free speech is a bit fuzzy because where does it become incendiary and lead to violence? And yet it's free speech. So that's a gray area. But as far as taking action and persecution, especially physical, or even emotional or kind of mental persecution, those things should be fought against as much as possible. So I think having an identity shouldn't mean everyone has to fall into line and do the same thing. That's what it's meant historically for a lot of countries. The king is this religion, you follow this religion. And there are people now who are arguing that, we are a Christian nation. And while we certainly have majority Christian citizens, we are not a Christian nation. We are a nation that is, everyone can come and be part of it. And that doesn't mean, and then there are Christians who say we feel persecuted because we're not allowed to express our ideas. I agree that no one should feel that way. I'm the first in line to get up and say, this may sound trite, but the first in line to get up and say, what's the problem with calling a Christmas tree a Christmas tree? There was a whole big move to say holiday tree. And no one can say Merry Christmas. Well, that was blown out of proportion. People were saying Merry Christmas all the time. I wish people Merry Christmas. People wish me Merry Christmas. I just say thank you. I don't go into a whole tirade about no. And it's just how it should be. People should be able to express their own ideas. So I've written publicly, I love Christmas. I think it's wonderful. I don't celebrate Christmas. It's not my holiday, but I love it. I love the songs and the lights and the story of it behind it. The religious meaning is very significant, even though it's not what I follow. And I think people should be free to express that. I think Jews should be able to express the same types of ideas. Muslims, same types of ideas. But the extremists in every group who go around saying we're right and the rest of you are wrong, and we think you should follow our ways, that is where I draw the line. That's not what it's about.
I do. I don't know if I would agree with the way he characterizes it, but I do think, at least in my observation, there seems to have been patriotism has been kind of hijacked on some level, and maybe that's not the best word, but I think the right seems to be more like if you're somewhere, if I'm driving down the road and I see an American flag posted on someone's house, I would bet the odds are that they're Republicans, right? And I don't think that should be the case. I feel like that's strange that that's happened. When I was in the seminary, we had an International Food Festival day. We had a lot of cultures down there. It was my favorite day of the year. It was great because they'd all make their food, and you just pig out. It was awesome. And but America, sometimes Americans, there would be a couple of guys like, we're going to do America, United States, and it was horrible. It would be like they go get a couple sacks of McDonald's, and like some Coca-Cola, and I was like, this is not like. Meanwhile, the people from Latin America and so on, they were super proud of their nation, super proud of their history and their culture. They'd get all dressed up. They would have their flags. They would have, very interesting stuff. And I was like, you know what? Let's do our people some justice here, right? We're a little more than McDonald's. And so I went to this trouble of, I joked I was going to get one of those giant inflatable, like Uncle Sam's, like you see in car dealerships or something, and like set it up in this building. It would have been ridiculous. I did look into it, but it was not feasible. But I made it's like a video just showing stuff, American presidents and all kinds of history. And we had all this food. I had this guy take off work and slow cook ribs all day. And we had this really nice little stuff, some Jack Daniels and some booze, it was good. And some of my professors walking by were very uncomfortable with it. And they're like, oh, it's a very interesting thing you have here, because it was very patriotic. And they were uncomfortable with that. And I thought that was very interesting. And this is 15 years ago. And I still feel like there's a sort of discomfort with some people in the country. And I don't want to necessarily say it's always the left or the right or whatever, but that there's a sort of shame that we've been kind of led to. We have to be ashamed of our country. We have to be ashamed of things we've done, and we can't be proud of it anymore. Or that by being proud of your country means automatically that you're some kind of Christian nationalist, or that you're a nationalist, or that you think everybody else is worse than you or less than you or something like that. And I don't think it has to be that way. I do think there are people who've taken it to that extreme, and that's why maybe it's a turnoff for some. But I think it's really our duty, all of us, to kind of reclaim being a patriot, right? And the left too. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be seen as an exclusively Republican thing or a MAGA thing or something like that. I think that's not good for us as a country. We have to have some shared identity and some shared values that's going to bring us all together, right? That transcends these political differences and these policy differences and so on. We have to have something that keeps us together, or I don't see how we can stay together as a nation ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, certainly see the importance of that perspective and agree with a lot of it. I would just say that when you use the term patriotism, I think this is where a lot of the issue comes from. I totally agree. Patriotism is a good thing. It's an important thing. Jingoism and extremism is not. But patriotism and being proud to be American, absolutely. The problem I see, is that let's, take the political sides. One side accuses the other of being unpatriotic because they don't believe this, and this. And the other side says the same about this. I think not everyone, but a lot of the people who others are accusing of being unpatriotic are very patriotic, and it's both sides. The problem is being patriotic doesn't mean we have to fall into line and believe this. It means we believe in being proud to be American, wanting the best America possible, not only for ourselves, but for all who want to contribute positively and not be destructive in coming here, and are able to do so legally. But that doesn't mean that everyone will share the same way of doing that. I really see a lot of parallels with, we're not here to talk about Israel and the Middle East, but I see so many parallels there. There are a lot of Jews who are very divided right now about Israel. They tend to be right wing. They are very supportive. If they tend to be left wing, they are not supportive. And to me, it doesn't matter if you are this side or that side. You should be supportive and be proud, and support Israel as a Jew and as a human being, because I think it's very important. I think as an American, we should be supporting America, regardless of our particular views and regardless of who the president is or who the governor is or all these different things. That could be now, or it could be back when Biden or Obama or whoever was president. It's the same thing. It seems, unfortunately, that a lot of people are almost cheering against the United States in this current conflict because they don't like Trump, or they don't like, and it's not a matter of who you like as president. It's a matter of supporting your country and the goals they have. You don't have to agree with it all, and you don't have to say I like war or think it's good, but sometimes things are necessary. So I think that these things start to show. I think people have knee-jerk reactions. So I think patriotism has to be re-examined, and there has to be a lot more leeway for what constitutes being patriotic.
I love in the Episcopal Church how we pray every Sunday for the president and the governor, whoever they are. When it's a new president, a new governor, we pray for them.
Yeah.
So this is going fast. This goes fast. You had said that you were going to stir things up a little bit. I just figured
Yay.
Figured I'd give you the opportunity if you wanted it. You were just trying to make me afraid to facilitate, right? So is there a problem right now with democracy, the American idea? Is it with each other? Is it with human nature? I think of the framers as being very good students of human nature. Just anything there that you want to respond to?
I think if you look at what their philosophy was regarding our government, they were very, I think, aware that there was a necessity for a virtuous populace, a virtuous citizenry, an educated citizenry, and you couldn't. That was important to maintain this system. So when we complain about our politicians, we have to remember that they didn't take it by force. We voted them in, right? I mean, this is a reflection of our government and a reflection of us on some level. So when we get really angry about it and think, "Oh, I can't believe these politicians," but they didn't show up on their own. Like, we put them in the office, so we need to kind of take some ownership of that and realize that there's something that we're doing here as well. Of course, it's always the other congressman. It's never mine. And ours will always win re-election, right? But the other, we hate Congress, but my congressman's awesome. He's great, or congresswoman, whatever. So I think there's something about that the founders were aware of, and we've seen that. I remember even Teddy Roosevelt, one of his books, his autobiography, reading about that. He discusses that a little bit too. The importance of our people have to be a moral people and a virtuous people. Now that scares people. Well, whose morality and whose virtue and so on. And I think this is part of the challenge that we're in today. We've kind of torn down those sort of foundations, and those have been kind of left up to question. And what do we do about that? The rabbi mentioned that we allow everybody should be able to come here and so on, and I agree. But one of the tensions in a liberal society, and I mean liberal in the classical sense, meaning free, is there has to, it's not empty. The government's not neutral. The government operates by values of some sort. For example, you have a right, we have by law, we're supposed to send our kids to school. It's illegal to not do that, right? That's a statement on whether something's right or wrong. So what informs our government's values, so to speak? Because our government isn't neutral. It doesn't just operate like a computer or an AI thing, although maybe that's coming soon to a world near you. So I think that's an interesting thing, right? So what do we do if our country, like, how do we maintain that, or I think that's a big conversation. I don't have necessarily the answer, but I think there's something serious that's going on there. I think a lot of people would agree that things have changed in terms of values in our country. Some would be okay with it. Some would be against it. There'd be a lot of conversation around that. But I think the need for formation of a people is something important. I'll give one little example. I went to visit Texas A&M some years ago, really to look at their campus ministry. It's one of the most successful in the country. They have 3,000 active Catholics there, and it's just an incredible operation they have. So I went over there to kind of explore it, and I was very startled. Has anyone ever been to A&M before? Okay, some people joke that it's like a cult. If you're an Aggie, like, it was really fascinating. They have all these rituals, and they have all these things that these call and responses and all these rules on their campus. And a lot of it probably comes from their military history, but there's just like, you don't walk on the grass. And there's a certain hall that you remove your hat because it's memorial to the cadets or something. And it's a study hall, and you're expected to be quiet in there. And everybody follows these rules, and everyone's like happy. It's a strange thing. Everybody I met there was really happy. Like, they loved being there, and they loved being a part of this. And I love FSU, but contrasting that with Florida State, where if you were to suddenly be like, "Hey guys, we're Seminoles, so we don't walk on the grass," like, you'd have people protesting that, like, "We're on the grass anyway." Yeah. But there was something about this history, narrative, esprit de corps, whatever, of that school. And they actually have a term for the people who don't participate in they call them like the 2%ers or something like that. They're the ones who don't really get into the whole thing, and they're kind of made fun of in a way. And so there's almost like a cultural pressure to be on board with all this. There's something valuable about that. And I think the fruit of it was the pride and the energy and the friendliness and the happiness of the people around that. And again, I don't know how you replicate that, but there was something positive I experienced there when I contrasted to my experience at the university across the street that I live in, when they talk about, we're FSU and we're Seminoles, and what does that mean, right? Like, what does that really mean? Unfortunately, the tragedy last year brought us together in a lot of ways, that community. But I hate that that's what had to kind of bring us together, to feel some commonality, was that we all suffered this tragedy together. We wish there was something more positive that we could rally behind other than our football team, which, what happens when that's not doing well? You know what I mean? some thoughts. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Look, unity is a good thing. Like coming from Canada, as I mentioned before, one of the big differences is Canada, rather than being described as a melting pot like this country is, it's often referred to as a mosaic. And I love that. A mosaic has all the different elements, but they don't lose their identity to blend in and become one kind of amorphous group. And I think there is an attempt in this country to have more of that, and also the desire among certain people to not have that. You come here, you have to do what we do. So, I would, respectfully say I think there is a place for what you're describing at Texas A&M, and people who like that, and that's fantastic. However, not everyone wants that. Not everyone agrees that, don't really care about walking on the grass or not, but not everyone agrees with that. Or, people can be respectful of nature. People can be respectful of remembering others without having to, fall into line and do all these different things. However, sometimes the other extreme is a problem too. I mean, I want to talk about college campuses. I admire here at FSU when, for example, there was an anti-Semitic incident, it was dealt with. There was no nonsense. You do not do that here. Whereas other places, it was ridiculous what was going on. Places that I would normally be very supportive of, they were horrible, in the name of, allowing people to do it. And I think some of the leadership was very anti-Semitic as well. And that was probably under the table. So I think there is some time for, as I said before, when you cross the line, then there have to be the rules. But if it's not your style, the nice thing about this country is if that's not for you, you don't go to Texas A&M. If you are one of the 2%, you should be allowed to have some freedom, but maybe it's not the place where you want to go to. I just don't want the country to turn into, as a whole, well, if this is not the way you want to do it, you're not welcome here. But that doesn't mean you come in and throw all your laws and disregard our laws. That's not what I mean. But I mean, everyone should have room, especially religion. There should be room for all different ways of doing things as long as they are respectful to one another. But back to your original question about the Constitution, I think we haven't really quite got into this, but as a Canadian, I never really studied American history growing up. But our son, who's now 25, studied it growing up, and I would kind of read with him and study stuff, and I learned a lot doing that, and seeing Hamilton, of course. But it was really interesting because when as a rabbi, just as the way I think, when I read about the Constitution, I thought this is very similar to Bible in a sense, because there are these two camps of people who are literalists and look at the Constitution and say, this is what it says, and if it doesn't say it, it doesn't mean it. And then there are others who say, no, it was written as a document, things that they couldn't even think about, the founding fathers. Just like this might sound sacrilegious to people, but I would say the people who wrote the Bible also thought, it was God's word, but there was their interpretation of God's word, and the things that they couldn't have thought of at the time. So it doesn't mean it's pointless and not have any value. It has tremendous value, and I do think it's divinely inspired. I think the Constitution has tremendous value because it has a tremendous amount of wisdom behind it. But there are people who say, well, we should look at the Constitution, and just because it doesn't say it in there, what's the spirit of what it says? Would they in other words, if they had been here now in this room having this discussion about this point of the Constitution or this question in society, what would they say based on the values they showed in the Constitution? Not was it actually said in the Constitution itself. So I think that that's part and parcel of the inflexibility among certain people when it comes to how we interpret things, and there needs to be a balance of the two.
Tim?
Yeah, I wanted to point out again, I think I started to say this, that there's a tension. And I think one of the things the rabbi brought up, we get a little uncomfortable. Like when I use the example of A&M, I'm not suggesting that we should have laws that stop us from walking on the grass. It's a cultural thing, right? It has to, I think we get nervous when the government starts telling us how to live and so on, and we should. But I do think there's something, we have to stop looking to the government to solve all of our problems. That's kind of my point, because if they're a reflection of us and we need some help, we need to do something to ourselves. And I think it's one of the reasons I'm a priest and not a politician, is I don't think the politicians can fix everything. I think this stuff comes from people like us to help form culture, to help form hearts, to help form people to ideas and values and so on. And hopefully that will trickle into leaders and government and so on. But there is a tension in our society, and we don't have a neutral government. I'm going to say that again. If we believe in exactly, we have freedom and we believe that women have rights and so on, and there's places in this world that don't believe that, and that's their culture, and sometimes they tie it to their religion. If they were to come here, we wouldn't allow that. We wouldn't allow them to live in this way. There was a documentary that was put out, and I can't remember what it was called. I think it's called "It's a Girl," actually, is what it's about. But it's basically about that if you're born a woman in this world, like how dangerous that is. And it focuses on India and it focuses on China. And what was happening during the one-child policy is that people didn't want their daughters, so they were killing them after they were born. In India, the same thing. There's a whole background there with, and I'm not super familiar with it, I don't want to offend anybody, but with the caste system and I think dowries and all this stuff, that when you have a child, it's like, oh my gosh, a girl, because now I'm going to have to pay all this money to her husband, or I'm going to have to support her. And so what's happening is sometimes these women are just killed. The mothers themselves will go out and destroy their child. We wouldn't allow that here, you see? And no one here, I don't think, has a problem with that, but they would. Perhaps there's different values. And so how do we resolve that tension when you have cultures, religions, histories that are at odds with our Western liberal values that arose maybe from the Enlightenment, or some would say Judeo-Christian background? How do we handle that? How do we resolve that in a way where it's not neutral? And we can stop pretending that everybody agrees with it, because we don't. Not everyone in the world agrees with these things. And I think that's a challenge that we have here that's led to a little bit of a confusion here in our country right now. It's because we're afraid to say, yes, this is a value or something. We're afraid that's imposing on people. But the reality is we have to have some kind of shared values as a country, as a people.
So before you comment, we're going to queue up some questions. So if you can be thinking of your question while Paul comments.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think it comes down to something I would say for religion as well as a citizen of this country, that there is no freedom without responsibility. So by no means do I want to suggest that it's anything goes and everyone could just do what they want and not have to follow. If you want to be a citizen of this country, you need to follow the rules. There are laws and there are things that we do. As you said, you got to send your kids to school. You cannot compromise health by doing things. You can't yell fire in a theater. You have to be considerate of others and realize you're living in a society. It gets very gray, but there has to be a balance somehow between saying, yes, it's not anything goes, and there have to be laws and common norms. But saying values, I mean, yes, should we have same values? It would be nice to say yes, but what does that mean? Because take the patriotism again, that's a value, arguably. What is being patriotic? We can all have the same value and be patriotic. How do we express it? Very differently. That should be allowed within reason. But saying you have to do it the same way is not what would be the goal for me. It's having a good end and maybe having a different means to do it, as long as that means doesn't harm anyone.
Questions? What is America's story to you? What is your story in America? Another quote that we got from Dr. Kaminsky was, "There are no passengers on this bus."
There's what?
There are no passengers on this bus. So in other words, really to your point, this is a form of government that requires a lot of us. It requires our participation.
Yeah. Okay. This is an observation, not a question. What I observed what I observed a few minutes ago, I think, was a tension between a statement that about our need for common story, common culture, and respect for diversity. I understand why there's a tension there, and yet I think what makes America truly great is that we hold both. And so honestly, I was a little uncomfortable with the tension about it because to me, like I said, that's us. We do hold that tension. We have a common story. We respect diversity. That's us. That's my statement.
I think if I could just say something, I took my seminarians, a group of them, up to D.C. last year, and we went to Gettysburg, and we watched some of films and stuff like Saving Private Ryan and the Gettysburg movie, and so we went up there to and look at all the monuments, and went to the churches and all this other stuff. And one of the guys in my group was a Nigerian. He's an immigrant here. He's a student visa now, but he hopes to be here long term. I certainly hope so. He's going to be ordained a deacon next week, which is really exciting for us. But I thought it was really cool how we could bring him into this, and the whole theme of this was I jokingly call it sacred patriotism, and that he wanted to learn about these things, and that it didn't have anything to do with whether he was born in Nigeria or not, and that his family's not here. He's like a brother here or something, and that he could there's something he can enter into, that there's a way for him to enter into this being an American. And that's what I'm saying is we need to try to identify as best as we can, or at least have something that I think that anybody can come here, and that you can have this diversity, that it doesn't ask him to lose his history or his background as a Nigerian. He's also part of a tribe back in Nigeria. His food, his culture, like with the music, all of those sort of things don't get jettisoned just because he's American, but there is something that's adopted that he enters into, even if his history isn't tied into it like mine might be. I think there's something really cool about that, about our country. I could never become French. We see the difference there, right? There's nothing, I could go over there and live there.
The French probably don't want us to.
They wouldn't want me to become French, right? I won't ever be one of them. There's just something different about that doesn't have that, the word I'm looking for, I don't know, this entrance,
What kind of America as an idea?
Mm-hmm.
Which
something
it
that
was
transcends
from the beginning, which is
transcends skin color, transcends who your parents were, transcends all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with what you said. I think as often is the bottom line for a lot of these questions, it's this and this, not this or this. But I think that's what makes this country, at least ideally, great, is that it has the room in its basis and the way things operate for, at least ideally, for that to happen, that people can come and be under the big umbrella, but there's lots of room for different people and different ideas within that umbrella. But it is still under the umbrella of being American. Doesn't make you not American if you have a different thing than someone else who already is American. The question is, where do we draw the line? And the government is dealing with that now. And what point do we say, at what point do we say this is not going to be America anymore? If arguably, large numbers of people from certain places in the world come in and try to dictate their ideas on us and change what we are, the basis of what we are, that's problematic. If they come and say, look, I still want to practice who I am, but I understand that this country is full of people who are different, great. Then there's room for everybody.
Oh, thank you. As a child of the 60s and 70s, certainly we saw a lot of change, women's rights. We saw civil rights. We had Vietnam War. And a lot of those tumultuous events involved millions of people, but more importantly, great leaders. Dorothy May, Reverend Martin Luther King, and other people like that stood for these movements. But I don't see that today. I don't see great figures in social justice anymore.
Comments?
I guess it's hard to be seen as a great figure these days. I mean, they all had their detractors. I mean, unfortunately, even Martin Luther King, let's say, had detractors and he was shot. But he now goes down in history as, great leader and inspirational. I think that as soon as someone kind of steps one toe off this way or that way, people will jump on them, and it gets very hard to be seen in that way. I think a lot of the best people are probably very hesitant to step into the fray now because, I mean, being a politician is not easy. People could say being clergy is not easy these days. A lot of people say, no, they weren't. So that's true. But the atmosphere, whether it's being political or being a figure, I don't know. Maybe things are just so dominated by politics now that it's hard for a figure like that to step in. But it's true. It seems like we don't have anyone. I can't really think of anyone specifically who's not in politics who has really stepped in to that role as someone in the past did. Well, that's true. Yeah. I don't know if there's that unity behind it to do that.
So I think of you mentioned Dr. King. I think of Frederick Douglass before him calling us into the idea, holding us accountable for our shortcomings, which we will always have, but we need to be held accountable for. After that, Abraham Lincoln, Dr. King, to me, they are founders as well because they called us to the highest ideal. And maybe that's what feels like sometimes we're missing is who is calling us to our highest ideals historically that founded the country.
Yeah. I'm thinking a lot about what you're saying. I mean, I'm just wondering what the issue is here because there is an issue. Are we too comfortable? Are we too apathetic? Are we too divided? To be able to stand up to these things? Are we too skeptical? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's the case on a micro level as well as macro level.
I would throw out there. I think religion. I think politics has become religion for a lot of people, and because of that, I think that's somewhat part of it. Is we see we just jump to that. Everything's got to be. It's all about what's going on in Washington. No one's really concerned about the local level, what's going on, very rarely. Most people can tell you all about what's going on with Trump and the Congress, but they don't know who your mayor is, and they don't know who the county commission is, and they're not paying attention. Maybe the people in this room would, I imagine, but most people aren't. But it's become ideological in the bad sense of that term, and it's become religion for them. I think it's you're either. Those leaders stood apart from the ideology. They were unique in their own way, and I think there's not a lot of room for that these days. If you're not ideologically pure on the left or the right, you're cast out, and you don't get a platform. And today's world, the platform is the internet and it's the television, and I think it's just a little bit different. You also have to be good looking and have charisma and do all these things that maybe in the past wasn't as important. Abraham Lincoln, for example, was not a charismatic man. Everyone talked about he spoke strangely, had a weird voice, he's kind of ugly, he's strange, There's a lot of presidents, if you go back and look, none of them smiled until Kennedy in their pictures, you know what I mean? So there was something else that helped them rise to the top, and it wasn't just show business and being a carnival barker, basically, which I think, I'm not impressed by any of the folks that run these days. I don't know, I have a feeling this room is pretty against the current administration, I'm sure. I'm not for any of them, by the way, but I look at the candidates and I'm just disappointed that this is what we have to offer. The country as large as it is, with all the talent and education we have, this is what shows up. Is just, I think, it's an indictment on us all. It's not very good.
We have a question here.
I am one of the last of the baby boomers. I'm a retired judge as well as a minister. And what I see is the tension of what you're talking about. One of the questions that I would like to ask is, with the war that's going on, with Pope Leo and all that he said against the war, and then the alleged threats from the Pentagon, I'd like to know, how are you dealing with your congregation, particularly Catholics all across the world, and particularly in the U.S., And is there a tension there? And how are they dealing with this? Is supposed to be America and democracy. How do we threaten a pope?
I'm not familiar with what the threats were to the Pope.
They raised the issue of partisan and someone who had been taken out or threatened years ago. And Pope Leo supposedly has now pulled back his schedule of any visits to the U.S. because an official from the Catholic Church was called in to the Pentagon. And there was allegations that they did not like what Pope Leo was saying against the war. Am I the only person who has heard that? Okay.
I'm not saying it. I don't know. I'm just not informed on that. I know that again, I haven't really, I don't spend a lot of time reading about that stuff. But my understanding with one of the things that the Pope criticized the current administration on the war was specifically some of the prayer that Secretary Hegseth had said. And it said basically God, I think he said God doesn't hear the prayers of those who start wars. Because some of his language, and coming from a military background myself, I understand the culture and what I don't take it too seriously when I hear the Secretary of War now called saying some of these things. I mean, I heard all that stuff in the Marine Corps, so it's not surprising to me. And it's sort of, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just saying there's a sort of context there that kind of comes with like locker room talk kind of thing. But I think there's still nonetheless there's a consequence of our leaders in government praying for destruction of our enemies, and so there's something not Christian about that. And I think the Pope is criticizing this attitude that we have. And I think the church, it's hard. I mean, I have a congregation. I said politics has become religion. I have a congregation of a very mixed congregation, culturally, politically, the whole 9 yards. And there are some that, I mean, that are involved in very high in government here in our state. They go to our parish that they're Catholic and go to mass regularly and so on, and are very, very devout. But when the church doesn't agree with them, the church is wrong, you know? So and I think that's not just the people in power right now. I think that we saw that with the last administration, who a very devout Catholic, I think President Biden, yet differed on the church and ignored the church on a lot of issues. So it's not unique to Republicans or Democrats. It's just a common thing. I try as a pastor to challenge them, to wrestle when the church says something. There has to be times, I think, when the church is right and you're wrong. Otherwise, you're the church. There has to be some kind of shepherding happening, some kind of listening, some kind of formation happening. And so I try to challenge people to wrestle with these issues, not to take their brains out and not to think for themselves, but to wrestle. If the church is against the current policies on immigration, or against abortion, or against the death penalty, or against this war, or some of the language, we should allow ourselves to be challenged by that and see, maybe examine ourselves, not just immediately knee-jerk, well, they're not on our side, they're wrong.
So we're about out of time. So I want to ask one last question. So the next 250, is there a story that most of us see ourselves in? And I'm going to throw out something that means something to me as a part of the Village Square all these years. And that is that, until the ideas of our framers, the way that disagreement was often worked out was people killed each other. And so this country they formed based on the concept that we, in fact, would disagree. And they disagreed from the very beginning. There's the whole story of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams having a very, very long feud. There's, a sitting vice president killing the Secretary of the Treasury. So there was serious disagreement from the beginning. But we have institutions that allow us to metaphorically kill ideas instead of each other, right? So we're supposed to be in this disagreement, this constant disagreement, and that my theory is that's what we have in common. That is profound. The idea that we can live into exactly who we are as humans and do it in association with a country full of people doing the same thing who profoundly disagree.
So this may sound unrelated, but I told this story in my first service here within a Jewish context. There's a particular prayer called the Shema, central prayer in the Jewish liturgy. And there's a story about someone who came to a synagogue and noticed that some people were standing during that prayer and other people were sitting during that prayer and couldn't understand, what. And so went and asked someone, what's the custom here? Do you stand for this prayer? Do you sit for this prayer? And one person said, oh, we stand for this prayer. And another person said, no, we sit for this prayer. Another came up and, no, we stand, we sit. And a whole bunch of people gathered and were arguing back and forth. Finally, the person went to the rabbi and said, Rabbi, I'm really confused. I want to know what's your custom here. Do you stand during this prayer or do you sit? All I hear is arguing. He said, that's our custom. So that reminds me of this kind of, may we always have what we call Jewish tradition arguments for the sake of heaven. May we have arguments and differences because that's what creates growth. Without difference, we are stagnant and we don't have any real chance for growth and thinking and learning from one another. So my hope would only be that in 250 years, we're still saying there are still arguments, because the alternative is that we're not here in 250 years and so there's no argument. Otherwise, human nature is debate. And this is a country that allows that to happen. And I just hope that it's still there and done as in a healthy way as possible. It'll never be perfect, but I hope it'll continue to be healthy debate and lead to growth for this country.
Yeah.
You think that's a mic drop?
That was fine. That was a great conclusion.
So thank you to both of you. I do want to, now that I have the mic for once, I do want to say that these 16 years of God Squad, it really has just been extraordinary. I'm about to go to Denver, and we're going to talk about God Squad because I had an opportunity to talk about what was most important about what we do at the Village Square, and I wanted to talk about this. I think that it's been just an extraordinary conversation. I'm so grateful to you all and so grateful to you. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Liz.
Corey, Nathan, back with you. What a rich and timely conversation. A few things are still rattling around for me. What's your story of America? Not one story, mind you. Arguably, there are about 340 million of them. And that's not a bug. It's part of the design. The Declaration famously opens with truths the founders called self-evident. But as Liz pointed out, those truths were anything but self-evident in the world of 1776. Proclaiming them carried real risk. And as Jane Kamensky, who joined us on the last program, put it, to believe in America is to believe in possibilities. Not identical abilities or identical circumstances, but access to the same opportunities. Father Tim made a point that really resonated. Patriotism has been, in his word, hijacked. The flag has been claimed by one tribe, which turns it into something others feel they have to reject rather than reclaim. And then both Father Tim and Rabbi Paul agreed that's a problem for all of us. Reclaiming what it means to be a patriot is not partisan work, it's civic work. And then Rabbi Paul's parallel between the Constitution and Scripture landed for me too. Literalists on one side and those asking, what would the framers say if they were in this room today? Those being on the other side. And that tension isn't a flaw in either document. It's where the living interpretation happens. And then there's the through line of the whole conversation. There is no freedom without responsibility. Government derives its power from the consent of the governed. Democracy depends on a virtuous, engaged, participatory citizenry. Or, as Dr. Kamensky put it, there are no passengers on this bus. What's the story for the next 250 years? It won't be perfect. It never has been. But we can continue to have the argument, and the argument done well is itself the American story. With that, it's time to close out today. Please consider joining our members and supporting this program. You can join all of this programming, actually. You could become a member for just $7 a month or $76 a year, and your business can join for $250. So we got 76 and 250. See what we did there? Go to villagesquare.us/donate to join today. That's villagesquare.us/donate. While you're there, sign up for Village Square's newsletter to stay up to date with everything happening at the Village Square. Go to villagesquare.us, scroll to the bottom, and there's a sign-up box there. There's also a pop-up box that makes it really easy for you as soon as you go to the site. Village Square is funded in part by Florida Humanities with support from Federation of State Humanities Councils and the Mellon Foundation. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of our funders. Learn more about Florida Humanities online at floridahumanities.org. That's floridahumanities.org. We appreciate you listening to Old Lady Liberty is 250, and she's having an identity crisis. Until next time, we challenge you to reach out with an open heart and mind to someone who doesn't look or think like you. It changes everything. We'll talk to you soon, and thanks so much for listening to Village Squarecast.